All right. Well, I think we've got the majority of our registrants tuning in, and out of respect for everyone's time, we will go ahead and get started now. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining, and a special appreciation for those of you who were willing to bear with us on the reschedule. I know that folks have been very curious about the content that we're going to be sharing today with the recommendations for the budget for the green fee. And we appreciate everyone's willingness to come with us a week later to make sure that we had all of the information available that we knew we wanted to share with everyone. This is the third webinar that we've hosted for the Green Fee Advisory Council, and we know that many of you have been tracking with us throughout. My name is Christine Matsuda, and me and my colleagues at Pa'akai Communications have the great honor of assisting the Green Fee Advisory Council with communications and outreach as they've gone through this process of designing evaluation criteria, sharing that criteria with all of you, and using the criteria to make budget recommendations to the governor, which have now been transmitted to the Hawaiʻi State Legislature. We want to thank folks for being here. We're hoping to spend the majority of the time today on the budget recommendations themselves, which is, we know why all of you are here. Here's an overview of the agenda for today. There's some context that's really important to ground ourselves in with respect to the purpose of the Green Fee Advisory Council and Act 96 that established the Green Fee. There's an overview that we'll do of the project ideas and the funding recommendations, and we'll talk about what is going to come next as these funding recommendations have now been transmitted by the governor to the legislature for consideration. We'll wrap up by providing some insights into how that process will go and how we invite all of you to participate in that legislative process over the course of the next several months during session. And then, as always, we want to make sure we're able to answer as many of your questions as we can. So really encourage everyone to use the Q&A function throughout. And then we'll do our best to save some time for live Q&A at the end with our Green Fee Advisory Council members who are present in this webinar today. My colleagues will be answering questions in writing as we're able to as they come in. If you don't see an answer come through for your question in writing, as we're moving through the presentation, that means that we're flagging it to answer live at the end. So if we are unable to get to everyone's questions, which is always our goal, then we'll be sure to follow up with you afterward. And just like prior webinars that we've done, if it's a question that seems like it would be valuable for others to have access to that information as well, and it's not already part of our FAQ, we'll add it to the FAQ on the website and really continue to encourage folks to visit that website because there's a lot of good information there. And if it's a question that's really specific for your individual circumstance, then you might get a follow-up email from us directly. But we are certainly very committed to answering as many questions as we can. We'll also just make a note here that everything we're presenting today the webinar will be recorded, first of all, and we'll get that up on the website as soon as we can. When we're scheduled to conclude at 4:30, the website will also be updated with all of the information that we're sharing. And the report of the Advisory Council will also be released via the website at that time. So that's all my housekeeping. I will turn it over to our chair, Jeff Michalina.
Mahalo, Christine. Great to see everyone. Mahalo for being here and joining us. And let me just give a quick just shout out to Christine and her team for doing such a fantastic job on communications. They have been indispensable and done so much fantastic work. I also just want to start by acknowledging something simple here, that there are so many people joining us. I see over 300 on a Monday afternoon to discuss this. And it really just shows how much folks really care about getting this right. And that's been our main priority over the last 6 months. And we're excited to share sort of where we landed here today. So mahalo for showing up and joining the conversation. Many of you have joined previous webinars, so a lot of this will sound familiar, but today is a bit of a milestone. And so it's worth grounding ourselves a bit in the purpose of the council and why we exist. We are a group of 10 unpaid volunteers that were appointed by Governor Green in August of last year. And, here to sort of think through this process with a pretty clear charge, make sure these green fee dollars are invested in ways that truly matter for Hawaii, both today and in the future. It's sort of a precedent-setting year, and we wanted to make sure we got this right. This means projects that protect our natural systems, strengthen our communities against climate and disaster risks, and really help tourism work better for both residents and visitors alike. We're not starting from scratch. We're really building on the work last year of the governor's climate advisory team that was headed by Chris Benjamin and the many community advocates, many of you who fought so hard to get this landmark law passed last session. So fortunate to be joined here today by five of our fellow council members. We have Carmela Razuma, you'll hear from shortly. She's with Kilohana of the Hawaiian Council. Jack Kittinger of Conservation International and now ASU. We have Jeff Wagner of Outrigger, Dennis Wong of Sea Grant at UH, and Eric Koh with the Castle Foundation. I think Michelle Kawane was also with us. Hopefully she'll be joining back shortly. There are several other members who weren't able to join us today, but they've been deeply involved the past 6 months throughout this process, including Leah Hong of Trust for Public Land, Janice Ikeda of Vibrant Hawaii, Keone Kuoha, who has vast experience in nonprofit leadership and sailing across the Pacific, and Hokalea. It's really been a team effort over the last 6 months, and just so grateful for the generosity and the hard work that all of these volunteers put in this effort. So many of you are familiar with the green fee, so I want to keep this really high level, but just taking a look at where we are here. This is the increase in the transient accommodations tax, 0.75%, that was created through Act 96 last session. It brings our TAT up to 11%, and that took effect January 1st. So it's been collecting revenue for the past few weeks. For the first time, it also applies to not only hotels and vacation rentals, but also cruise ships, and it's projected to bring in about $100 million annually. And that's important to note. This isn't a one-time sort of experiment. This is an ongoing, dedicated, resource to help take better care of our climate resilience and our natural resource. One important clarification, because there's been an understandable confusion about the green fee. There isn't, unfortunately, a green fee special fund. The TAT revenue that's collected through this process goes directly into the state's general fund. And then from there, the legislature decides how exactly that money gets appropriated. So our council isn't doing the allocation of money. We are advisory. We're making recommendations to the governor. That then goes to the legislature where it is now, and they will ultimately decide how those appropriations are made. The purpose of the green fee is very explicit in statute in Act 96 that passed last year to support environmental conservation, to support climate and disaster resilience, and then to support sustainable tourism here in Hawaii. So those three equal buckets. I know a lot of you are curious about the status of the cruise ship industry challenge. And it's something that we're watching also. The most recent update is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has temporarily blocked the collection of TAT from cruise ships as of January 1st. So while Act 96 is very much in effect, there is a pause right now on the cruise lines paying that tax. But we know the Attorney General's office is actively litigating the case, and they're confident they'll prevail. And so because of that thinking, we haven't reduced our recommendation, and we are sticking with our original sort of portfolio for fiscal year 27, but we're watching that close. I think it's also worth remembering, why this matters overall, and really cruise visits do place real pressure on our harbors, beaches, wastewater systems, emergency services, cultural sites, and those very systems that the green fee is designed to strengthen. And in fact, we received proposals that kind of spoke to this, where certain areas were, disproportionately impacted because of cruise ships. In 2024 alone, cruise ships accounted for nearly 1 million passenger port calls. And until now, they haven't paid the TAT. So we see a clear nexus there. And we certainly hope the state prevails and the cruise ship pays their share to help support these systems that they depend on. Finally, I'll note that the act that passed, Act 96, has what's called a severability clause, where even if the courts ultimately rule against applying the TAT to cruise ships, the rest of the law will remain intact. So it would just simply mean fewer dollars overall for green fee resources, but it would not mean the end of the green fee. So important to note. So let's dive into, I think, what you're all waiting for, which is the recommendations. And I'm going to pass it over to Jack to talk about the evaluation process, sort of at the high level before we get to that. Jack?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate that. And thank you all for joining. It's a great moment to share with a bunch of colleagues and interested folks from across the Pai'aina. As Jeff mentioned, we've really been committed at the advisory council level to providing a thorough, equitable, and transparent evaluation of the projects that were submitted for potential green fee funding. And as a reminder, after we were convened in August 2025, we then turned around and solicited ideas from the public and state departments and agencies about how to use the funds. Thank you all for those of you who put projects in the portfolio. We received over 600 project ideas from state departments, from agencies, from counties, and of course from the public, from all sorts of different groups and thought leaders from across our communities. Together, this comprised more than $2 billion in project ideas. This is 16 times more than the amount of available green fee funding that we have for this fiscal year. So, on one hand, that gap just shows how important the interest is and the resonance this is with our communities and with our research stewardship community, but also the gap between our current resources and what we need. But as Jeff mentioned, this is year over year. So some of the projects that weren't selected for year one funding, are going to have plenty of opportunities in out years to get funded. We, through our evaluation process, are recommending 75 high priority projects for this first allotment of funds. And we're going to share a bunch of details about that in just a few minutes. But 75 might feel like a small number, but many of these 75 projects are amalgamations or groups of other projects that were submitted. So my colleagues will share more about that in just a moment, but it's less about the number than the topic areas is a way to think about it. Let's look at the evaluation criteria just so we can review this again. We looked at each project, all 600, against these criteria, these five criteria, the five R's. So first is results. Will this work achieve tangible outcomes for our INA, for our communities, and for our shared infrastructure? Is it ready? Is the project ready to go and actionable today? So if these folks get the funding, it's shovel ready, and we're ready to kind of demonstrate impact right from the outset. Thirdly, relevance. Does the project meet the statutory requirements of Act 96, which Jeff just reviewed in brief? Relationships. Can partnerships between the government, between communities and businesses be leveraged to make this project successful? And then thirdly, region. We want to make sure that we're funding things across communities from a wide array of geographies across our islands. So that was a key part of it too, to ensure that we're addressing high-risk climate impacts across the Pai'aina. Our eval process, we had to score every single project against these criteria. And we did it in triplicate, which means every project got scored by 3 different advisory council members. That meant there were over 2,000 total evaluations completed by our 10-person volunteer council. So the folks you're looking at did a lot of work, and it was a great team to do this with. We received a lot more ideas that we can fund this coming year. That's why we really tried to focus on making sure the evaluation identified the projects and groups of projects that really rose to the top and are going to be the most impactful for us. Okay, our funding recommendations report. As Christine mentioned at the very beginning of the call, as soon as this webinar is over, this report will be published to the website. It explains the details of the projects that the Advisory Council recommended to Governor Green and his team. And the next phase of the webinar, you're going to hear from all our colleagues here about the specific project portfolios and what is entailed in each bucket of funding. I'll add one more important point here as a reminder. The way Act 96 was written as passed, it requires the green fee funds to go through the state budget process. Jeff will talk about that at the very end, I know, when he talks about the next steps with the legislature. But this means that the legislature appropriates the money to state agencies and departments. The act currently cannot directly appropriate the money to nonprofits, community organizations, or individuals. That does not mean that those entities cannot be funded. They just have to be funded through state agencies and departments. And many state departments already have existing procurement, grant-making programs that can be used to get green fee funds into the community organizations on the front lines who carry out this important work alongside our folks in state agencies and other departments. So we'll talk about those just in a moment. And with that, I will pass it over to my good friend and colleague, Eric Coe with the Castle Foundation.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. I share the other community members' appreciation for all the work that you put in, as well as the demand that you've shown. I think it really helps to substantiate this as the right thing to do. As you can see on the screen, this is the kind of breakdown through the three categories of funding as directed through the Act. And I think one thing that was particularly interesting here was that we were given very clear instructions that through the legislation that these three were to be funded equally, and that's something that you'll see in the report. We're hoping might change over time depending on not only funding availability but interest. For environmental stewardship, there was an immense amount of interest in the green fee, and thank you again very much. I suspect a lot of that came from you folks on the call right now. $24 million has been recommended to go toward native species and terrestrial ecosystems. And you can imagine these are all very overlapping, right? This is kind of maybe a very high level breakdown across those systems, aquatic and coastal systems, as well as freshwater resources and watersheds. I'd like to think, particularly with this very thoughtful group, that the binning might be up for debate, but I don't think those priorities that were identified are going to be things that you're going to disagree with. For environmental stewardship projects, there were 28 that were recommended for funding. 8 focus areas for stewardship grants. Obviously, the mosquito abatement initiative is one that we wanted to support, as well as native bird protection. So many of them are critically threatened. You'll see here a finer scale breakdown of some of the things that we've identified as funding priorities that we can unpack with you later on. But again, I think you'll be able to see the detail in full in the report. And yeah, further list of what we're looking at. I just want to maybe some high level commentary here. Again, I think what we wanted to do is try and pull out the priority ideas and projects that were proposed either through departmental proposals or through the portal. And hopefully you see yourself in these priorities, and yet we could not name specific projects or titles or organizations. And hopefully this is getting to one of the questions that I took a peek at, because that would preclude that organization or that project from a future competitive funding opportunity that might come out of the green fee. part of what needed to happen this year, which I understand isn't streamlined. It's not maybe the most efficient way to do it, but the way this was established, one of the things that we have to work with is that all the funding is going to go through departments, through state entities. And so if there's going to be a competitive process under one of these priority topics, that's going to come down the line. And maybe all of that's to say is that this is this is a fairly long and arduous delivery chain for funding from what came through in terms of project ideas all the way through to what will ultimately be supported. And we're taking it as far as we can in terms of granularity of the priorities that we'd like to see reported and we're recommending.
Eric, we went pretty quickly through these topics, and I wonder if I could invite you to speak a little bit more about one of the earlier recommendations in the slides, the Green Fee Community Stewardship Grant Program, because that was one of the larger recommendations, and maybe I can toggle us backward here a little bit. That was kind of right off the top in those eight focus areas. So the eight areas, just again for everybody, under discussion for this grant program, which is very much related to what you were just talking about. Ahapua'a restoration, nearshore marine ecosystems, invasive species control, marine resource protection enforcement, coastal ecosystem restoration, coral restoration, Mulivaira wetland restoration, and fish ponds restoration. This is something that doesn't yet exist, this grant program, but we're really excited about this recommendation. Anything else you might want to share a little bit more about there?
Only that we obviously wanted to put an emphasis on supporting community groups and our nonprofit partners in Hawaii that we know are doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the ground across these categories. And again, don't want to repeat myself, but because of the way this is structured and knowing that this had to go through agencies first, this was our best thinking on how to capture across those thematic topics those priority efforts that we know are important for Hawaii and we know are important for you folks. And so, yeah, again, I mean, I think this is one of those things where we are absolutely building the plane while we're trying to fly it. And so this was our best effort at trying to recommend and ideally guarantee a means by which non-departmental partners can benefit from the green fee and do the work that they know they need to do to make Hawaii more resilient and sustainable. Sorry, was that helpful? Sorry, I went through that so quickly.
Yeah, maybe if I can just tag on one thing to keep as food for thought for everybody. This is a proposal, that a recommendation based on feedback from you all, who have been so great in giving us really thoughtful input throughout the course of this initiative so far, and through the recommendations of the council members who are here, and those who are not able to join us for this particular webinar. And it will require collaboration with the legislature in order to create such a grant program. So just to foreshadow something that I know our council members will be speaking about later in the webinar, advocacy during session is absolutely critical. And this is one of those areas that this is not an existing program that we're just funding. We're asking for this to be something that can be supported collaboratively, collectively, as this budget bill makes its way through the legislative process. So thank you for indulging me, Eric. And so shall we go to Dennis to talk a little bit more about the next funding categories?
Yes, thanks, Christine.
Okay, hello everyone, and thanks Christine and Eric. We're now going to be talking about the climate resilience and hazard mitigation bucket, so they say. And this category focuses on initiatives that harden infrastructure, protect Hawaii's communities, and help prevent future disasters made worse by climate change. So you could see there are actually 6 subcategories in this bucket. And of course, fire is a major concern, especially after the 2023 Maui wildfire events. So there's $21 million in that subcategory to reduce state wildfire risk through vegetation management and preparedness. There's $6.7 million for multi-hazard mitigation projects. We know that for most hazards in Hawaii, the risk and the hazards are overlapping, and that compounds community vulnerability. And so a lot of those projects which were especially related to multi-hazard mitigation, we made this category. And this, along with most of the other hazard mitigation projects, require a holistic approach to solve it. We just don't want to address it with one strategy when many strategies may be needed. And then there's $6.4 million for climate research work that improves climate and hazard data and our understanding, and also to support better decision making and planning. Okay. And then could I have the next slide? Okay. So there's also $3.1 million to address household and community preparedness. This includes projects that strengthen emergency evacuation planning, shelter hardening, and home strengthening. There's $3 million for coastal and flood mitigation projects that address flooding, erosion, storm surge, and improve flood hazard mapping and adaptive shoreline management. Finally, there's a $1 million for a pilot project for cesspool conversion on Hawaii Island. This cesspool issue is a big issue that needs to be addressed in the future. So this is a good first start to do this pilot project. But now I'd like to pass it to Jeff to share about other specific projects in the climate resilience and hazard mitigation bucket, and who we recommend receive funding. And then we'll cover some more after that. So Jeff, you're on.
Thanks, Dennis. And we're so grateful to have Dennis as part of this HUI. He is the state's expert when it comes to home preparedness, hazard mitigation, and knowing what to do. I think we all joke that if that hurricane comes, we're all heading to Dennis's house. Before we dive deeper into the climate resilience category, I just want to reiterate something that Jack shared earlier, because it really stuck with us as a council. We received over $2 billion in project ideas, and roughly $130 million in funding. So that gap is sobering, and it really showed us, kind of two things at the same time. One, just how big this need is and how much demand is out there. But it also showed us how much great work is already happening across Hawaii. So as Eric said, it really substantiates the need for this dedicated funding. Okay, in the climate resilience hazard category, we're recommending funding for 31 projects statewide. And here are some of the kind of largest and most impactful investments. First, as Dennis shared, fire is really top of mind. So we have $6 million for Hawaii wildfire risk reduction and FireWise communities programs. These are existing programs that empower neighborhoods in high-risk regions to take proactive science-based steps to reduce wildfire danger. And as the state's only community-driven fire preparedness program, and one that's already rapidly expanding, it has lacked consistent funding despite its proven impact. Second, $5 million for a Hawaii Home retrofit program to reduce hurricane and high wind damage. This builds on recommendations from last year's CAT and legislation that was considered last year. The program would include a feasibility study. We think that's important for Hawaii. A lot of this is modeled after what some of the coastal states have done successfully. Of all things, Alabama has one of the most successful programs in the country addressing this. But ideally, designing something to come up with a modified fortified roof standard, delivering audits, resilience upgrades, and multi-hazard risk reduction for homes. We have a target of 1,500 audits and 750 homes improved with this first tranche of funding. But a program, I think, near and dear to Dennis and my hearts that we really need in Hawaii. Then $4 million for brush and vegetation removal, particularly around public schools. This work reduces wildfire risk, improves drainage, and creates defensible spaces where most urgently needed. As Eric Coe has shared, the best way to reduce wildfire risk is native plants. The best way to reduce flooding risk is native forests. So these are areas of real high priority for us. Beyond those, we're also recommending, and here's sort of a iteration of some of the other projects, $3 million for a climate resilience crew to build scalable statewide climate disaster resilience workforce, probably particularly focused on younger folks, conducting vegetation management, reducing wildfire fuel loads, and maintaining those defensible spaces around high-risk areas. About $2.5 million for hazard mitigation and energy redundancy at the Kona and Kohala hospitals. $2 million, and that's actually part of a larger project that's being funded by the federal government. $2 million to help small businesses prepare for and recover from future disasters. This also came out of some legislation last year. $2 million for wildfire mitigation work on DHHL lands. $2 million to replace water tanks at Hale Pi'ula rain catchment up in North Kona. $1.5 million for statewide irrigation, public safety for the power shutoffs that might occur, during red flag events. So that might include, battery storage and solar that keeps those systems running despite the lack of grid power. $1.5 million to conduct statewide inventory of existing water systems and prepare a prioritized list of water systems that are critical for ensuring the state's resilience to natural disasters. A little over $1 million to restore dunes and native vegetation around Kailua and Lanikai beaches to protect them from that erosion that's being exacerbated by sea level rise. Something interesting, a big issue that we hear from Haima and other folks looking at, broader challenges is the, need for acute food security during a disaster. So can we build in buffers to the system to make sure people can get fed if something were to happen? So we're dedicating $1 million to these pre-covery pods, something that Chad Buck has been experimenting with on the Waianae Coast, sort of insulated containers that are stocked with long-lasting, shelf-stable meals to ensure immediate food access for communities that may be cut off after an event. And then finally, $1 million to buy and process this synthetic aperture radar INSAR satellite data to really give us better visibility into understanding where we need to do more wildfire prevention and risk assessment. But together, these projects are really reflecting the idea that, this resilience isn't abstract. It shows up in safer homes, safer schools, safer hospitals, communities that are better prepared before the disaster strikes. So let me toss it back to you, Dennis, for the remaining climate hazard and mitigation projects.
Okay. So we already mentioned that we have a pilot project for cesspool conversion. So that's one of the other additional projects in this bucket. There's also the $915,000 for the Kalailoa Reef Lab project, which will allow the Hawaii Department of Transportation to test the effectiveness of hybrid reef structures to dissipate wave energy before it reaches the shore. It's very important because reefs are natural protection, protect against erosion and wave inundation. Okay. There's $750,000 to mitigate land-based pollution and restoring ecosystem function in priority watershed areas. There's also $518,000 to expand early wildfire detection and hazard assessment capabilities across the state. This through a network of camera systems and drones. Yeah. There's 513,000 for strengthened public safety measures throughout the Hawaii's state's forest reserve. There's also 500,000 to support the Hawaii Mesonet, which is our statewide weather and climate monitoring network of approximately 100 telemetry stations that provide real-time information on rainfall, temperature, humidity, wind speed, wind direction, air pressure, and solar radiation. It's 500,000 to help establish the first coral restoration and nursery facility on Kauai. Again, the importance of coral reefs to protect the shoreline. It's very important. There's 500,000 for West Maui climate modeling. This is to map climate hazards for Kaanapali, Lahaina, and portions of West Maui, addressing sea level rise, wildfire, extreme heat, declining rainfall, deepening drought, and coastal erosion. There's also 500,000 to study the impact of sea level rise on buried infrastructure. This is a very important problem now. It's actually happening right now, and sea level rise is causing the water table and also increased seawater infiltration or salinity, and it impacts drainage systems, sewer systems, and building infrastructure. So this project is going to address that. There's also 500,000 to address flood risk and water security in Waipio Valley. This will involve reconstructing irrigation canals, rebuilding degraded taro terraces, stabilizing erosion-prone slopes with native plantings, and outplanting indigenous species to restore watershed health. And there's one more list of projects to go over. For the hazard resilience hazard mitigation projects, there's $500,000 to develop a state parks fire management plan, $400,000 to create a state climate adaptation plan. This is hasn't been done in Hawaii, but it's been done in many other states. Very important to create a holistic approach to addressing hazards with a multi-sectoral cross-sector agency collaboration, and even addressing land use. Okay, there's 300,000 for the state flood hazard assessment tool, which is very important web-based GIS flood mapping tool. It will have the flood maps, the most current flood maps for the state. People could look up their flood risk. They'll also be able to access storm surge data and also dam evacuation zones. Okay. There's 300,000 for the Aloha Safe Homes project that educates residents on determining their hazard risk, gathering their emergency supplies, making emergency evacuation plans, and strengthening homes. There's 300,000 for facilities assessment for hurricane refuge areas. This is very important. People always ask about where are we going to go for hurricane? Where do we go for a shelter? There are many existing buildings that may be suitable. So this involves assessment and analysis of existing public and private facilities, which may be utilized. There's 267,000 for the La Pahoehoe Community Charter School for hardening of their media and band room to withstand a Category 3 or 4 hurricane. There's 250,000 for the Hanalei flood notification. This was an area impacted by the 2018 floods, and this notification system will strengthen infrastructure resilience, protect natural resources, and reduce risk to residents and visitors during flood events at the Hanalei River. And then the last category and last project in this category is 162,000 for the Loco Ia Resilience Program to support statewide fish pond resilience and increase capacity to protect against climate-related threats like sea level rise and increasing sea surface temperatures. So with that, I'm going to pass it either to Carmela or Jeff to go over sustainable tourism funding.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Appreciate that feedback. The projects that we recommended or were recommended by the council in this category support destination management, reduce visitor impacts on the natural environment, and improve and protect heavily visited areas upon which Hawaii's visitor industry heavily relies. And we recommend funding across 3 different subcategories. In the first subcategory, we have $25 million for beach and park improvements across the state. This is to restore, maintain, and enhance heavily visited beaches and parks. This funding is going to protect Hawaii's most well-known natural resources. It's going to improve safety and ensure these areas can sustainably support both residents and our visitors. The second subcategory is $12.1 million for visitor and resident education and stewardship programs that promote responsible behavior and strengthen stewardship through education, outreach, cultural interpretation, and community-led restoration and engagement programs. And lastly, the third subcategory is $4.55 million for infrastructure and capacity building projects that improve the systems and staff needed to manage popular sites, including facilities, transportation, reservation tools, and operational support. I'm now going to pass it over to Carmela to touch on some of the specific projects within the sustainable tourism category that we recommend receive funding.
Hello, Jeff. So those were the big buckets. So now we're going to talk about the 13 more specific projects to receive funding for the sustainable tourism work across the state. And so here are the top 3 funding recommendations. The first off is $7.62 million for various community-led visitor education and stewardship programs that advance regenerative tourism and destination management across the states, and particularly at high-use sites. And so to echo something Eric said earlier, and as well as Christine, we heard you. Community is already doing this work, and so these are the vehicles by which we hope this funding gets into community. Secondly, we have $7 million towards the Waikiki Beach Restoration Project, which would fund planning, permitting, and design and construction of the initial Halekulani Beach sector nourishment and stabilizing groins, targeted actions that restore lost sand, protect shoreline infrastructure, and provide safe lateral beach access. And lastly, $6.75 million for beach restoration at Ala Moana Regional Park, which is already underway and requires additional funds to complete. And so with the remaining sustainable tourism projects include $4.75 million for regional park improvements at high-use park and coastal recreation areas that both visitors and residents use. The funding would support things like native landscaping, wildfire risk reduction, and upgrades to restroom and visitor facilities, consistent and modern regulatory and interpretive signage, and ongoing maintenance. $4.3 million to improve high-use natural and cultural sites and tourism hotspots. So including but not limited to areas like Kiholo Bay on Hawaii Island, Ho'opili Falls in Kauai, Waimea Valley in Oahu, and other key trail systems that face high visitor demands. Next, we have $4 million towards adaptation and pathways planning program. In collaboration with government, Kaanapali Operators Association, community partners to identify long-term science-based, community-led strategies for resilience. So things like living coastlines, really honoring the place and figuring out how to move forward in Kaanapali. We have $2 million for coastal resilience projects in West Maui, so Kahana Bay and Kapalua Bay. So including targeted sand nourishment, shoreline stabilization, reef and water quality restoration, stormwater and flood risk reduction, and nature-based solutions such as living shorelines. We also have $2 million for the maintenance of existing day-use mooring buoys, which prevents anchor damage to reefs. $1 million to Namanu Elele Land Stewards Program, which places trained local stewards in Hawaii's high use and most culturally and ecologically sensitive areas. $980,000 to maintain natural coral reef breakwaters in high impact locations where visitors and residents go. $500,000 to put in clear, consistent, regulatory signage for fishing, habitat protection, and marine resource management. $500,000 to install new day-use mooring buoy sites. And lastly, $250,000 to develop a comprehensive and sustainable trail system for Kuia and Honopu Trail area to improve visitor safety, elevate hiking experience, and protect Hawaii's most sensitive natural areas. And so we also encourage you to go to Green Free Hawaii to see the full list of projects that the council recommends. I know all of us have gone through this as high level as we can, but detail can be found on greenfreehawaii.org. And so now that we've talked through all the projects that we recommend, now moving on to something that is near and dear to a lot of our hearts, which is monitoring and evaluation. So we want to make sure that this process is transparent and that we also, as a community, all of us understand where this money is going. And so there is a funding priority that we have for a total of $1.5 million to be reserved for monitoring and evaluation for green projects. And so again, critical that there is maximum transparency and accountability of how this money is used so that the public can see for yourselves where the funds are going and how these projects are making a difference. And so we have recommended an allocation of $500,000 for each category. So again, to reiterate, environmental stewardship, climate and hazard mitigation, and sustainable tourism. And the council supports the state creating a public dashboard or other resource that showcases the amount of green fee funds taken and appropriated to projects each year. And the information will really be helpful and important to help other states and countries learn from the green fee and how to potentially replicate it in their own places. And so with that, we'll pass it on to our chair, Jeff Mikulina.
Mahalo, Carmela. And it's so great to have Carmela with us as well. Not only does she know so much about this interface between visitors and cultural and natural resources, but also she loves spreadsheets, we found out in the process, which is super useful. Okay, so what you've seen today, everything that we've shared is included in the recommendations that we formally submitted to the governor in mid-December. From there, the governor's office then reviewed the full list to determine which projects were feasible for inclusion in the proposal that has recently been submitted to the legislature. And the review that they went through really considered, department capacity, available funding, other existing, funding sources, and really the ability to responsibly expend those funds within the required timeline. As we shared before, these funds have to be either encumbered or spent in that first fiscal year. So that was a real constraint for this, and the administration had sort of the best visibility into how we could, get these dollars out to have the best impact. So there were a small number of projects that were removed or deferred from the governor's final proposal, and that's now been transmitted to the legislature as the governor's message. This is really just normal budget coordination. It doesn't change the council's advisory role. It doesn't change the integrity of the process that you heard about today. It's just a few things where we're sort of swapped out for various reasons. Looking back and kind of thinking about the big picture here, one of the things that I've learned over the years is, good ideas, don't disappear or, go away just because of one cycle. And this isn't a one cycle process. This is very much an ongoing, dedicated source of funding. So these good ideas, we know that they're going to resurface, they're going to evolve, and they're going to come back stronger when the timing and capacity aligns. As I shared before, this isn't, a one-year experiment. This is really a long-term commitment. And today's recommendations are our starting line. We're not at the finish line. So where are we in this marathon? Although it felt like a sprint, it's very much a marathon. We're very much squarely in the 2026 legislative session that kicked off a few weeks ago. And now is when the key decisions are being made. Again, we were advisory. The governor submitted his recommendations, and now it's up to the legislators to decide exactly how this green fee funds will be appropriated through that traditional state budget process. So the two budget bills that we are tracking are Senate Bill 2500 and House Bill 1800. And between now and the end of April, those bills will be debated, amended, negotiated, considered. And really, our council is looking forward to that continuing support of lawmakers to provide and help them, have an understanding of the rigorous process we went through. They're going to see this list of projects, but we hope that they appreciate that behind it was some synergy in thinking about how these projects work together to really have the highest impact for the green fee funding in this first year. The new fiscal year starts then July 1st of 2026, and that's when departments and agencies will be able to deploy those green fee funds and get things happening on the ground. So we're going to move on to your questions, but if I could just take a personal point here, I want to share a couple of things. One is, I think for many of you that were involved both with passing the green fee and then later submitting projects, some of you might have seen that, gosh, my project or my suggestion isn't on the list. And I share and appreciate your frustration. As heading up nonprofits for 25 years, I can personally speak to, I don't know how many grants that I've applied for that, didn't receive funding or were somehow ignored, and the frustration that came with that. So that is real and natural, and I get it. But it doesn't mean that project or that concept wasn't strong. In many cases, it just means that we were forced to make some really tough choices in this constrained process and system and the way the legislation was written. And we also recognize we have far more need than resources. So I really want to be clear that many of the ideas that didn't make this list this year have absolutely helped shape our thinking and really inform the process and pointed to where future investments in the green fee should go. So we encourage all of you to get involved with the legislative process. This is really where the rubber hits the road. Your kokua now really, really matters. And, as we've seen already through some of the conversations, lawmakers have a lot on their mind, a lot of things to consider. So they might not be up to speed with even the legislation that was passed last year, let alone, the set of recommendations that we're making. So the more you can engage in the process, supporting overall the package, supporting your interest areas, speaking directly to lawmakers, submitting testimony on these bills, will really help us make sure we have a good end result when the legislature wraps up in May. You can sign up for hearing notifications at capitol.hawaii.gov. Share your mana'o directly with elected representatives, testify, all the things that we need to do to get this over the finish line. We'll also keep updates going at greenfeehawaii.org, so you can engage in that way too. So I think with that, maybe we can move on to Q&A, and you can use the Zoom Q&A function to submit your questions. We might not get to all of them, but we'll do our best, and we're tracking all of these questions, and we'll definitely follow up afterward, have those answers on the website, and hopefully address everything that's coming in. But mahalo for joining us today, taking part of this process and being part of this incredible moment, really, for Hawaii's natural resources and tourism.
Hey, mahalo, Jeff. One thing that I will also just plug is our email tool. Many of you are here in this webinar because you are subscribed to the Green Fee Advisory Council's email list. Please encourage others in your networks to sign up to receive those emails because, like so many of our colleagues who do advocacy work, we'll be pushing out action alerts as we move through the session at key moments when testimony really matters, advocacy really matters. As many of you folks know, because these are budget bills, they don't get as many hearings as other kinds of bills that move through the legislature. And so the intervals are not going to be as frequent, and they will really, really matter when we get to those points where we need to make sure that our community is showing up in support of getting these recommendations fully funded. So with that, we want to move into Q&A. What I'll do is try to group questions that we're receiving kind of thematically and ask for clarification. And I really invite all of you who are participants asking these questions, if we answer them unclearly or insufficiently, please ask a follow-up because we want to make sure that we are being as forthcoming and transparent as we can. And if we're not answering the question properly, that is certainly not our intent. So please do ask follow-up questions if we're not, getting to the meat of what your question is. So there are a handful asking for clarification about the process again by which we solicited input and how that input was accounted for and whether or not the Green Fee Advisory Council was able to name specific organizations, specific projects, or just general priority issue areas. So I wonder if, Jack, maybe I can invite you to head us off just to describe, again, a little bit more, perhaps revisiting those distinctions about what the Advisory Council was able to do in terms of naming specific projects versus specific organizations, maybe as a starting point, and then we can tease out the rest of the detail from there.
Sure, and I'm sure Jeff and others will keep me honest here, but in a nutshell, and I think Eric mentioned this in his section briefly, we cannot recommend organization A should do project one. Instead, what we can say is, you know what, organization A is doing fantastic work in watershed, restoration. So are organizations B, C, D, E, and F, right? And that's indeed what happened, in concert with, of course, state agencies. So what we said was like, wow, look at the need for watershed restoration. It's an important part of the environmental stewardship bucket. So we're going to allocate on the basis of the high scores of, in some cases, more than a dozen submitted projects that had very similar aims, but maybe happening in different geographies, and put that into a watershed restoration bucket that organizations who applied for, if it gets approved by the ledge, can then go, get access to this funding. And to be clear, not just organizations that applied, but if you're with an organization that also does great watershed restoration work and you didn't happen to apply, you still have access to this pot of funding, if it's approved, to go pursue those activities. So we went more topic based and made sure that the most important things to prepare us for climate resiliency were funded, and that a broad array of organizations would have access to do that with their state partners across the board. But we did not, just to get to your original question, name specific organizations. We just instead allocated on the basis of merit for the projects and to provide hopefully equal access for lots of organizations to get some of the funding to do their good work.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jack. Is there anything anyone else would like to add by way of clarification on that one? Okay. Well, I'm sure our participants will ask follow-ups if we are not clear enough. Carmela, I'm going to go to you with this next kind of thematic bucket of questions about transparency. There are a couple of questions that have come through asking how will the public know which organizations, therefore, given everything that Jack just shared, which organizations end up doing the work after this appropriations process happens. So again, the legislature, as the body who's in charge of the appropriations, will make those appropriations through the legislative process. The money will go to those state agencies, and then partners will be identified. And then how will the public then know who's doing the work?
Ooh, that is the $1 million. Wait, no, I'm gonna make a joke. That's the $129 million question. Okay, so let me start first with a nonprofit and then I'll go to the public. So, if an organization, and there are many that we love that are sitting in this room right now, are wondering, how do I have access to this money? I feel like folks have answered that, but to be more clear, like, be in conversation now with the state agency that would likely be appropriated funds in your area. And then be ready after that final budget bill passes to work with that agency on whatever their procurement or grant making process is. So it's just another thing you could help advocate this session, to make sure these allocations stay present and funded. And so that's for organization folks. And then for public, who are desiring to know, okay, well, if organization A gets it, how is it getting spent? And so I would say, first, stay in contact and stay on this mailing list, right? greenfeehawaii.org. And then also be kind of engaged with your community, because my hunch, and I feel like this is quite accurate, is that when these funds start getting distributed to community, once the procurements are getting released by this different state agency, it's not going to be something behind closed doors. These are public procurements that happen, and then whoever gets awarded those RFPs are named publicly. So it might be maybe it'll be complicated, maybe it won't, but we are hoping as a council to make this as transparent as possible, which is why we recommended $500,000 towards each bucket, 1.5 million in total, so that some type of monitoring system can be established so that we could see agency A got this funding, and now they're contracting with organizations D, E, F, and alphabet J, G, to do that work. And then we could see where that money goes into community. And it is my hope that if there's a community project happening down the street from you, then you can also take part or see it for yourself, because you folks will be the ones that'll have more eyes than the 10 of us do, to make sure that this happens in the way we all want it to.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. There's a question here about the legislative process, and I'll read some of the language from this particular question because I think it's put really well here. So the Green Fee Advisory Council reviewed proposals, selected projects based on the established criteria. However, the recommended list must still be approved by the legislature. How will transparency be ensured in the legislative decision-making process? So now we're talking about this window of time, right, that we're in right now before the kind of transparency that you're describing, Carmela, which is like post-appropriation. So the process is going to happen during this legislative session. The questioner asks specifically, what safeguards are in place to prevent the addition of unrelated projects by legislators last minute and ensure that the Advisory Council's recommendations are reviewed and funded in an equitable, transparent manner? I will open to any and all of our panelists to address this one, but I'll take moderator's privilege here and say a lot of that depends on all of us in community showing up to be advocates and call for what this question suggests.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Christine. I think it's on all of us now. I mean, the legislature, obviously, there's 76 voices there. They're wrestling with thousands of measures. And this is a budget appropriation. I mean, they certainly saw the value in this in passing Act 96 last year. The governor then, appointed this advisory council to kind of do the heavy lifting and sorting through and prioritizing and coming up with this portfolio. But it's going to go through this democratic process, and it can be messy. And to speak to your question directly, there really aren't those safeguards. I mean, it's a democratic process. They can decide how they want to spend these funds. It's really on us to make the case that these were well thought through. These are projects that can be executed. They're regionally distributed. They're addressing some of the high impact climate resilience, tourism, and environmental needs. But it's going to require us being there, sharing our voices and advocating. I think, what was it, Winston Churchill who said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all of the others. So these are the cards we've been dealt with, and it's really on us to make sure they see the value and keep this intact, and particularly for this first year, because this is, a new process. We want to make sure this doesn't turn into, a process where they're just looking at certain districts or, having their pet projects being funded. We really want to look at this holistically and think about what's highest impact in this first year.
Hey, Jeff, if I could throw in as well, these are not new projects for the state. In most of these cases, these are things that people have been talking about for a long time. Our state legislators are aware of these projects, and many of them are aware of these projects and the need for them in each one of their communities as well. So I think that what you will see, and I guess a lot of these were state department submitted. So these are things that have been out there for a long time. We did take into consideration the several hundred projects that were public submitted, because there were incredible projects that came through the public as well. But many of those came through the state departments as well. So I think that you'll see that with what we're recommending, it's not new news. These are things that are really needed. There hasn't been funding for a lot of these in the past, and this green fee has now created a mechanism to have funding for them finally. And they're important for the state. And one of the things that we would love to see, we're not in control of it, is that this package stays together, that this really does get funded the way it's been recommended now by the governor to the legislature, because these are important. And we want to see these get done, as Jeff indicated, in this first year. We've got a year and a half, basically, from now till the end of the 27 session to get these projects completed, to get them underway, and to be able to show that this green fee is going to be material and really make a difference for our state.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Jeff. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Eric.
I just really want to double underscore that, Jeff. I appreciate you bringing that up. I think part of what we're hoping, and hopefully we've conveyed it through the presentation today, is that these are meant to be a systemically considered complementary portfolio of projects that cut across a lot of issues. We understand the synergistic nature of both the issue and the solution. And so we really wanted to present what we could as a coherent and comprehensive suite of efforts that we recognize as priority, and we know you do too.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I agree. The projects are interrelated, complementary. They're designed to address problems holistically. So you may think that a project is not that important, but it may be very important to address to reduce risk for a certain problem. And there is a lot of risk we need to address, not only for hurricane, but wildfire. And these projects are what we view as the ones with the greatest benefit for the cost. So, it's a lot of thought went into this portfolio of projects that were selected.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. There are also a kind of a grouping of questions around expenditure timelines that I wonder if we can go back and clarify that, because that's an important detail. There's, one question here about what exactly the timeline is for, these funds once appropriated to be fully expended. And then also, are there any mechanisms in place to ensure that that is in fact occurring? So Jeff, Michelina, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Actually, think about the second half of that question. Carmela mentioned this desire for a dashboard evaluation, continuous monitoring. We think that's really important. And in fact, there have been a few measures introduced this session to formalize that in statute. It would just be so fantastic for this to be very visible. And so, visitors and residents can see your dollars are being put to work on the ground. This trail improvement is brought to you by the green fee, or, this program is, thanks to this green fee funding. That's important just to connect those two and really show the value, and also to build, I think, political momentum for this concept. We talked before about this is somewhat unprecedented. No other state has, put in place a visitor impact fee. So being able to really transparently show the impact is going to have some follow-on effects probably beyond our shores.
And if I may go into the weeds just a little bit. So new fiscal year starts July 1st. The budget is approved in May. And every state agency needs to do some type of process by which money gets out into the community, into the world. And so, and I know more about this than I realize I would know, but it takes a minute for the money to move, right? And so I think, just managing everyone's expectations of money's available to state agencies and then money gets into community might take a couple of months, but it is going to be, and it is required to be encumbered, meaning spent. So out into the community by the end of the fiscal year. So that's July of 2027. So just knowing that these funds are going to be out into the world and doing what they're supposed to do by the end of June.
And Carmela, if I could also add, one of the things that we dealt with is several of the projects are large projects that are going to require multi-year funding. And so when Jeff and Carmela talk about the integrity of the process and keeping this together as a package, part of it is we had to think long-term on some of these projects as well. And so we can't appropriate funding or even recommend the funding for the future year. We're only dealing with the period of time that Carmela was just speaking of. So this first 18-month period. And so as we move into the future from a continuity perspective, from us having the projects documented, for us having the technology to be able to monitor what we're doing, it's going to be very important as we get into year 2 and year 3, because there will be multi-year funding projects that are very necessary for the critical nature of climate initiatives that need to be dealt with in the state.
I want to acknowledge that we've got about 15 minutes scheduled in the remainder of the webinar, but there are a lot of questions that are still coming through, and we deeply appreciate all of these questions. We're just going to keep working through them and get through as many as we're able, and still be able to leave a little bit of time for closing thoughts from our panelists, from our advisory council members. And so again, if we don't get to yours, we apologize sincerely, and we will be following up to make sure that all this information does get out. There's a transparency question here. Were any of the proposals only recommended to be partially funded? For example, if a proposal was for 1 million, were there any that we would have cut and recommended for only 500,000, for example? Go ahead, Jack.
I can take that quickly. The answer is yes, that happened in lots of cases, because we had, 6 billion in requests and only 125 or so to disperse this year. But in some cases, projects were, sort of so discrete that we had lots of community projects that came in, at the 250 or 300K level, or even some that are at 50K, that were packaged into these bundles for the community stewardship projects, for example, where we didn't sort of think about a specific cap per project. We said, what's the total amount that should go to this topic, right? So I would encourage people not to think, oh, I submitted a project for $79,000. Did only 70,000 get funded? That's not actually the way this works. If you submitted a project for a topic and that topic is in here, then, once the funding gets released and the way that the funding is going to flow through the various state agencies, your organization should have a stab at it. I think that's right, but Jeff and others keep me honest here.
I'd also like to mention that there were a lot of good projects, like Jack said, that couldn't be funded. And we wanted to make sure some of the projects got off the ground, realizing that this they looked like multi-year projects, and this was funding for just year one. So if you feel like you need more funding, you could apply again in year two. That was our thinking of it. We wanted to get as many projects as possible off the ground or initiated. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dennis, and it brings up, some people had proposed huge projects that we looked at and said, this is really important, but there's no way all that can be expended in year one.
Yeah.
Because, some of these issues, of course, everyone on this call knows have been going on for decades, if not centuries. So, we're trying to get things in motion. Great point, Dennis.
Okay, next question is about input. There have been a couple of questions on this, so I'm kind of grouping some of them together. But what are the opportunities for people to provide input, raise further questions, give feedback, ask for more information about council decisions? And so maybe I'll invite you guys to respond in two parts. How can people give input to this configuration of the Green Fee Advisory Council? And how might people give input to influence the legislative outcomes? So again, in those two parts, how can folks make sure their voices are contributing to this process?
So I could start. So in terms of reaching us, what I appreciate Christine and her team for is creating this very, very robust website that has a contact form. And I know that it's working because I get relayed questions all the time. And so if you have questions for us, fill out the contact form, and Christine and team do the magic of figuring out which subset of us is the most appropriate person to answer the question if they don't have the answer already themselves. So that's how best to contact us and stay in touch with us. Also, all of us, I think, as a collective, are always out and about in community. Not to put my other council members on the spot, but we're out there. And so feel free to talk to us when you see us out in the proverbial wild. And then in terms of legislature and what to do and how to move about that, um, for folks that are new to the process, I mean, that square building may be intimidating, but it is ours. It's yours. It's a public building. And the Capitol website has a lot of great information about how to reach your legislators. And so if you saw a project on there and you would love to support more, just picking one, more day use mooring buoys, right? And that is a thing you're like, yes, finally, more funding's going to this. Talk to your legislator, look up who your legislator is, and find a time to drop by their office. It is welcome, it is open, and they are people just like us and are happy to receive that feedback and learn what's important to their constituency. So it is the first time maybe a little scary, but once you've done it a couple times, it is a way to advocate for the issues that you care about. So invite you to do that for not just green fee, but other issues that are concerning you and your community.
Yeah, I want to just emphasize something that Carmela said that's important. A lot of us think about engagement at the state legislature as hearing oriented. And like for sure, submitting testimony is really, really important. But that's not the only opportunity to be in contact with our committees and with our area representatives. As Carmela said, stopping by, sending an email, making a call. Those are all really powerful ways to make sure that in between hearings, folks are understanding what a big priority this is in your particular issue area that you care about, to make sure that funding does come through. Because like we had mentioned earlier in the webinar, because these are budget bills, they don't get as many hearings as some other types of bills. So that kind of outreach in between the hearings is really important. Jeff, you want to add something? Please jump in.
Yeah, Christine, I was adding a little bit of what Carmela was saying. One of the things that happened in this whole process was a very tight time frame that we all had. I honestly think each one of us probably put 100 hours each into evaluation and all-day meetings, and we wanted to make sure we got this done. We don't think that's going to happen in future years. We've set ourselves up nicely to be able to repeat the process, to be able to make sure that we're getting a lot more public input earlier. But we were compressed into a certain time frame that we just couldn't get around based on the bill being approved, and then when everything needed to be done for the leg session. So we worked fast, we worked a lot of hours, we worked a lot of nights. We think as we move forward into future years, that the process will start earlier, not only for us, but for all of you to be able to participate and be able to submit projects.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I want to acknowledge that we've just got not too much time left in the webinar, and I want to give all of our council members who are present an opportunity to share some closing remarks. I have just realized that a lot of the questions that we still have outstanding that we didn't get to yet are from anonymous attendees. And I realized that I have a problem, which is that if I want to email you after this to answer your question, if we run out of time, I won't know who to email. So if you are one of the people submitting anonymous questions, please email us so that we know who you are, so that we can respond, because we really do earnestly want to make sure that we have the opportunity to share information and be as transparent as possible. And unfortunately, we're time constrained today. A lot of these questions that are coming in are things that we can make sure are in the FAQ as well. But if you don't hear from us because you are sending questions anonymously, please do follow up with an email address that we can respond to. So thank you very much for all of these really good questions. With just a few minutes remaining, I want to go around and invite our panelists to share any closing thoughts, takeaways from this process, and the things that you're, I guess, feeling are most important to leave folks with as we embark on this legislative process. I'll have Carmela, you start, and I'll call on names as we work our way around the virtual room here.
I'm going to lead with gratitude. Gratitude for everyone who's present here. Gratitude to my fellow council members, and also gratitude to legislators who made this Act 96 a reality last session. And with that gratitude, I think also comes a level of responsibility. But this is only, not to sound like I'm asking you to all do stuff still, but this is only the beginning. Our work, and sorry, council members, we've all lost a lot of sleep. I got more gray hair than I had 3 months ago, but this is only the beginning. And so it's going to take all of us to continue to make sure that this funding remains intact. There was a question that I feel like some of us were not looking at the Q&A, which was, is there a possibility that none of this gets funded? And I want to believe no, but that is something that in a hopefully very unlikely world could happen. And so it's really going to take all of us to really advocate as much as we can to make sure that this green fee funding remains intact and funds all the wonderful projects we all talked about. So grateful to you all, and grateful for the council for making this happen, and for all of you all for being here and really being the ones that spearheaded and made this larger work a reality.
Thanks, Carmela. Dennis, can I go to you next?
Sure. Just thanks for everyone attending today, and it's very honored to work with the different council members. Just to the audience, stay involved. Like as I said, this process. It'll be probably a little different each year, but a lot of projects. Some projects are multi-year. Some projects are not and will be completed, and they'll need to be replaced with other things. So stay involved, because there were a lot of good projects that we couldn't accept all of them yet. So, but we tried to spread it as much as we could, not only for different subjects and areas, but also geographically.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah.
Jeff Wagner.
I just am really grateful for the public and the state departments really coming together and submitting thoughtful, important projects for all of us to consider. When you really think about what I was just talking about earlier, the timeline that we had to pull all this together, not only was it short for us, it was short for you. And many, many people, over 600 projects were submitted. So many people spent a lot of time and energy and effort on this. And I'm just incredibly thankful and grateful that we have that type of a community, that we have that type of a government process that really cares about this and contributed to the process. So a huge mahalo to all of you. And we look forward to continuing the entire process as we move forward.
Eric, closing thoughts?
I share everyone's gratitude for sure, for everyone on this call and folks who aren't. Frankly, I think it's taken all of us to get this far. As Kamala said, there's still a lot of unknowns ahead. What we know right now is that we have 129 million more dollars than we had before this year to put toward things that we really care about. And I know there might be some frustration out there in terms of how that's going to get out, when that's going to get out, to what it's going to get out to, the communication or lack thereof in terms of projects. Remember, we recommended priorities for those who will decide what will get funded. And so we've kind of played the role as the best we can right now. But ultimately, what really keeps me up at night is that $2 billion number, because I think it really speaks quite powerfully to not only the annual deficit we have in terms of how we invest in our communities and our places, but also the overall debt that we're trying to make up for. So, sincerest apologies, zero sarcasm at all, but sincerest apologies if we couldn't address what you feel is high priority, either fully or even at all. But the best thing we can do is advocate for this to continue, because that's probably the greatest assurance that any of us can have that we can continue investing in our sustainable destiny. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. Jack?
Yeah, to continue on that theme, I mean, look, folks, it's not enough. It's not even close to enough. All right, the sort of vulnerabilities we face all across our communities, the amount of funding that we need to prepare for the existing threats, not to mention where we're going with climate, it's not enough. Okay? But this is a great place to start. We didn't have this last year. Did we get it 100% right? No, we didn't get it 100% right. You're looking at a bunch of folks who tried our best. Great crew. I mean, I can't. We had a great, incredible dynamic. Thanks, Jeff, for coordinating us as the chair. They did a tremendous job. Everyone put their best foot forward, and we worked. We worked on this, guys. I think my last thought is, if this thing passes as the way it's written right now, we'd all be thrilled, and we get right back to work thinking about what the year after is going to look like and how to make sure the stuff that didn't get funded in the first tranche gets funded, and to make sure the stuff that does get funded works. Because the best way for this to stick around for the next couple decades is to make sure that we're having impact. That's all of you on the call and our other friends and colleagues all across the community. That's what we have to do together as a community. This thing took a decade to happen. It could go away if we screw up the first couple of years. So let's get it right. Let's get these projects going. Let's get the year after those going. And that's the best chance we're going to have to keep the green fee in place and to elevate its funding levels in future years.
And with the final word, Chair Jeff Michelina.
I don't think I could say it better than what you guys have already shared, but obviously a lot of passion and heart and care for Hawaii from all these council members and from all of you joining us. I know we've talked a lot about budgets and numbers today, but just briefly, I want to talk about another budget. I think it's our hope budget. And I think for many of us looking at what's happening globally and nationwide, sometimes our hope budget can get depleted pretty quickly. But this is a good news story. The legislature passed this last year. We're looking at year one funding, but this isn't a 1 year, thing. This is a cumulative annual dedicated appropriation that's going to show real results for Hawaii. And we have to admit that a lot of this was born out of the tragedy in Lahaina. And it's meant to fix things that are broken. And Lahaina really showed us how broken we are when it comes to climate resilience. So I'm very eager to see these funds deployed and see ongoing progress year over year on climate resilience and regenerative tourism and environmental stewardship. So mahalo to all of you. Looking forward to seeing you down at the Square building and getting this over the finish line. Thanks, Christine.
Okay, well, we just all want to again extend our sincere gratitude to all of you who attended the webinar today. The recording will be available for anyone who wasn't able to make it. We know there are some power outages, connectivity issues, all kinds of things that complicated this particular engagement. So that recording will be available on our website tomorrow, if not sooner. And as of now, the full report, which includes the rationale for the funding recommendations and the recommendations themselves, is live and publicly available at our website. So you can see the URL there, greenfeehawaii.org, which is also where you can sign up for email updates if you're not already on that mailing list, and check out kind of the latest news and updates from the Advisory Council. So please stay connected, send us your feedback, send us your questions, and we will be in close touch as we move into this legislative session. Thanks so much, everyone.